So what do we need next? We need some nice background color. So let's open up a layer and let's create a new one. So I'm going to hit the plus button and I'm going to rename it by deleting first background 1. Yeah, that sounds good. So I'm going to get rid of that. Pick out a nice color for my background, maybe a nice shade of grayish green. There we go. Now, I could color these backgrounds in like everything else, but I want to do it quickly. My reference layer is on my character inks right now. So I'm going to tap on that layer, and I'm going to tap on reference to turn off the reference layer. Because for my backgrounds, what I want is I want to tap on that, I want to tap on the panel inks, and I want to use this as my reference layer. Now when I go to my background, I can easily drag that green in there just like that. In fact, I think I'm going to be lazy. I'm just going to use the same layer for all of my backgrounds. And from here I can judge it and say, okay, that green is too dark, so maybe I want more contrast. So maybe I grab a lighter shade of green, and I can just come in here and drop that green in there and change that color around really quickly. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some detail to these backgrounds. And for example, let's use a slightly different shade of green. For this bottom panel here, this third panel, I want to add some speedy lines going across, right, to kind of give him a sense of urgency. But there's one problem with that. My lines here keep overshooting my boundaries. So we're also going to use alpha lock. So let's go to our layers. Now that we're on our backgrounds, we don't want to spill out of the background that we've already stuck here. So I'm going to just tap on that layer, and I'm going to go here, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn on alpha lock. So now I cannot paint outside of the paint that I've already put down. So that works pretty well for me. So I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to roll on in here, and I'm going to draw some speedy lines. And some of them will overlap, and none of them have to be precise. Just trying to get, you know, some nice lines going on in here. Some of them go across the entire panel. Some of them are thick, some of them are thin. Give it a little bit of personality with each line. There we go. How's that looking? I'm going to make that go all the way across, make it kind of thick, make it super thick now that I think about it. Put some thin lines in there too, some little lines. So there we go. Now he has kind of the sense of speed, the sense of momentum as he's running through whatever he's running through. So that was simple. In the first panel, I think we're going to draw him a boring kitchen. So just going to, I'm using two tones here. And I'm going to show you something really quick about the color drop. Is the problem is when you have two colors that are very similar, you might be thinking, well, Brad, you just filled this thing in with the color. Can't you just color drop in there? And I can't. When two colors are too similar, the color drop doesn't work too well. But Brad, what about color drop threshold? Still no go. If I drag it down here and then hold it and then scale all the way down to 0, you can see that color still isn't changing. So I'm going to just undo that. This is just one of those little things. It's not a big deal, but I'm just going to come in here. Actually, I'll increase the size of my brush, and I'll just roll on in, and I'll paint over all of this very quickly. And then I could come in, and maybe in the background there's the coffee maker he was using, so I just draw, you know, a really basic, you know, coffee maker in the background, whatever a coffee maker looks like nowadays. I don't drink coffee, so I'm not exactly sure. Maybe I add a second coffee cup over here in the background. Maybe I make it look like there's some boxes stacked up over here or something like that. Maybe add another coffee mug with the handle. You know, just give the background a little bit of personality. That's about all I have to do. Maybe I add a window over here. Maybe kind of make it look like a windowsill. Just something to give it some personality. And then for this middle panel, I'm going to add these kind of streak lines coming out, these surprise lines, which kind of draw to the center. So I'm just kind of taking my pencil from the center of his head and drawing outward, and I'm kind of varying the width of a lot of these lines. So some are thick and some are thin, and some I'm coming in here and I'm actually filling in with different widths. just to kind of add some variety to some of these lines coming out of his head. And this kind of draws you in. This is an old comic book technique. You see it in like Spider-Man oftentimes when the spider sense kicks in. You'll see something like that. So there we go. Add another line there. All right. So now we have some backgrounds. For the most part, this would be a perfectly fine, simple comic if we wanted to just keep it this way. But that wouldn't be showing you all the features in Procreate. So let's take it a step further and let's play around with some things. Something we haven't talked about too much up to this point is in the upper left-hand corner, there's a magic wand. Let's go ahead and tap on that. Now, we've got a couple things here. First, we have opacity, and this works kind of like the color drop tool. We can slide to adjust, and now you might be thinking, wait, don't we have opacity on the layers already? And yes, you do. In fact, if I knock the background down to 50%, and then I open it up in the layers and tap on that, it's right here too. So I'm just going to move that up. I think that's a holdover from an older version of Procreate. But we have a lot of other adjustments as well. For example, we have a Gaussian blur. And if I slide that up, it blurs the background. It really blurred the background. Here, let me move it down to like here. And you can see it just naturally blurs my background. So if you want to blur something a tiny bit, you can do that. If you want to blur it a lot, you can do that. So that's available to you. I'm going to undo that Gaussian blur. But we also have a motion blur. We have a perspective blur. We can sharpen things. So if your edges are a little fuzzy because you've resized something and you want to kind of make them less fuzzy, you can sharpen them with this sharpen tool, which works the same way. Mine aren't going to really look too much different because they're already pretty sharp. We can add noise. Let's see what happens. Let me zoom in and let me slide to adjust, and you can see how I've just added a whole bunch of noise to this panel when I do that. I actually don't want any noise, but if you ever want just kind of a little bit of a film grain effect, you could totally add that in. That could be a nice little touch. I'm going to undo that. So let's go ahead and let's actually add a little bit of a blur. Now, I only want to add a blur to this last panel here because this last panel has kind of him running. So let's add a motion blur. So how do we add it just to the last panel? This is all on one layer. Well, we use our good friend, the selection tool. So in the upper left-hand corner, I'm going to tap on that selection tool, and then I'm going to draw all around that box and make sure that that whole background is selected. And then from there, I can go back to my adjustments, and I can say motion blur. And I could slide to adjust the blur in the background there. So you can kind of see that kind of blurring in a particular direction. So now I can tap off my selection blur or my selection tool, and I've got my motion blur in there. Now the next thing I wanted to talk about in that little adjustment drop down is like hue and saturation, color balance, curves, recoloring. If you want to do any kind of color adjusting, this is what you need to take a look at. So let's take a look at this middle panel. Maybe we want to add some emphasis to that. So let's take our selection tool and let's grab this middle panel. And maybe what we want to do is we want to add some intensity. So I have selected that, and now I'm going to go over to my adjustments, and let's try hue, saturation, and brightness first to see what it does. So down at the bottom, we have brightness, so we can really brighten up that background to the point where we lose it. We could really darken it up to kind of add some heat, some like depth to it. I'm going to move that back to the middle. There's saturation, so we can make it more intense, make it that brighter green. That's kind of neat. We can adjust that saturation, and then we could go to hue, and we could actually pull it in towards blue, make it blue. We could pull it towards red, bring in some of that purple. You can pull it down here. I'm going to move the saturation down. Right? We can do that stuff. And so now when I let go of that, we've changed that middle panel. That draws that much more emphasis to that middle panel. So those are just fun to play with. Let's do it again, and let's just take a look at some of the other things that are in here before we jump to the next section. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to go to my adjustment layers, and I'm going to look at my color balance. Color balance is kind of like that hue slider that we just saw, except it gives you more granular control. You can also choose if you want to adjust the highlights, the midtones, the shadows over here, all that stuff. You can also undo it over there as well. The other adjustments that we have, let me go back to my adjustments, are our curves. This is kind of neat. Oftentimes, if you want to do something really high contrast, you can do that just by adjusting your curve. I can add a point, really blow it out, really make it dark, really kind of intensify those curves. I can move this curve over, move this one down, do really funky stuff. I think I don't want to do that. So I'm going to tap undo, 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 undo. There we go. Perfect. What else do we have in adjustments? Lastly, we have recolor. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the color that's in our color drop in the upper right hand corner, and we could choose how much we want to flood it in. Since the colors were very similar, it just flooded the whole thing with green. But if you want to recolor an area, that can come in very handy for you. So there we go. I'm going to undo that. I kind of like the purple feel that we had going on there. And now, well, we've played a little bit with the adjustments, and we have colored in the background of our comic strip.